Amsterdam today stands as one of Europe's most vibrant capitals, but beneath its picturesque canals and historic charm lies a story that defies imagination. This is the tale of how a muddy fishing village built on swampland became the beating heart of global trade, accumulating wealth that would make modern billionaires weep with envy. Tonight we'll uncover the extraordinary journey of Amsterdam's rise to become the richest city on earth, a position it held with an iron grip for nearly 2 centuries. Picture this: merchants who controlled more wealth than entire nations, trading companies that wielded armies larger than most kingdoms, and a city where ordinary citizens lived better than royalty elsewhere. Amsterdam didn't just stumble into riches, it engineered them through a combination of brilliant innovation, ruthless ambition, and strategic genius that changed the world forever. We'll start our journey in the murky waters of the Amstel River, where desperate fishermen made a decision that would echo through history. From there, we'll follow the city's meteoric rise through political upheaval, religious wars, and economic revolution. This isn't just the story of one city. This is the blueprint for how a small group of determined people can reshape the entire world. So settle in as we explore the incredible history of Amsterdam, where fortunes were made that dwarf today's tech billionaires, and where the very foundations of modern capitalism were born in the shadow of windmills and wooden shoes. When you think of Amsterdam today, you might envision tourists cycling along tree-lined canals, the vibrant colours of tulip markets, or perhaps the famous red light district. But strip away the modern veneer and you'll discover something far more remarkable. This city was once the undisputed centre of the world economy, a place where more money flowed through its ports than through London, Paris and Madrid combined. The Amsterdam we're about to explore controlled trade routes spanning from the Arctic Circle to the Indonesian archipelago. Its merchants didn't just sell goods, they created the first modern stock exchange, pioneered international banking, and established trading networks so sophisticated that they wouldn't look out of place in today's globalized world. But Amsterdam's story begins in the most unlikely of places, a soggy patch of land at the mouth of the Amstel River that seemed destined for nothing more than fishing and flooding. Around the year 1200, the area that would become Amsterdam was little more than a collection of wooden huts scattered along the banks of the Amstel River. The land was so marshy and prone to flooding that most sensible people avoided it entirely. Yet it was precisely this challenging geography that would become Amsterdam's greatest asset. The early inhabitants were primarily fishermen and farmers who had learned to work with the water rather than fight against it. They built their homes on artificial mounds called terps, elevated patches of land that could withstand the frequent floods. These early settlers developed an intimate relationship with water that would define their city's character for centuries to come. The name Amsterdam itself tells this story. It derives from Amstel Redam, meaning a dam in the river Amstel. This wasn't just any dam, it was a crucial piece of infrastructure that allowed the community to control water flow and create a harbour where boats could dock safely. This simple dam, built sometime around 1270, was the foundation upon which an empire would rise. But Amsterdam's location offered more than just protection from flooding. The city sat at the intersection of several crucial waterways. The Amstel River connected the settlement to the inland regions, while the IJ Bay provided access to the Zuider Zee, a massive inland sea that opened onto the North Sea and the wider world beyond. This geographic advantage meant that Amsterdam could serve as a natural hub for trade between the German states to the east, the Low Countries to the south, and the Scandinavian kingdoms to the north. Ships carrying grain from the Baltic, wool from England, and wine from France would naturally pass through Amsterdam's waters. The early Amsterdammers quickly recognized this opportunity. Rather than simply fishing the local waters, they began offering services to passing merchants. They provided safe harbour, fresh supplies, and local knowledge about tides, weather, and navigation. This shift from subsistence fishing to service provision marked the first step in Amsterdam's transformation from village to trading post. By the late 13th century, Amsterdam had received its first city charter, officially recognizing its status as a town with the right to hold markets and collect tolls. This legal recognition was crucial because it gave Amsterdam's merchants the authority to conduct business on equal terms with other established trading centres. The town's population at this time was probably no more than a few thousand people, but these early residents possessed something that would prove invaluable: an entrepreneurial spirit born from necessity. Living in such challenging conditions had taught them to be resourceful, adaptable, and quick to seize opportunities. One of the most important early developments was Amsterdam's relationship with the Hanseatic League, a powerful confederation of merchant guilds and trading cities that dominated commerce across Northern Europe. While Amsterdam was never a full member of the Hanse, it developed crucial trading relationships with Hanseatic cities like Lübeck, Hamburg, and Bremen. These connections introduced Amsterdam's merchants to sophisticated trading practices, international credit systems, and long-distance commerce. More importantly, they learned about the immense profits that could be made by acting as intermediaries in international trade. The breakthrough came with herring. In the 14th century, Dutch fishermen developed a revolutionary new technique for preserving herring at sea using salt and special gutting methods. This innovation, known as gibbing, allowed ships to stay at sea for weeks at a time and return with holds full of perfectly preserved fish. Amsterdam's merchants quickly recognized the potential of this new industry. Herring was a valuable protein source that could be stored for months, without spoiling, making it perfect for long-distance trade. More importantly, the timing of the herring runs meant that Amsterdam's fishing fleets were free to engage in other forms of trade during the off-season. This seasonal flexibility allowed Amsterdam to develop what would become its signature business model: adaptable, opportunistic commerce that could pivot quickly to take advantage of changing market conditions. While other cities specialized in single industries, Amsterdam's merchants were learning to diversify their operations across multiple sectors. The herring trade also introduced Amsterdam to the concept of vertical integration. Rather than simply catching and selling fish, Amsterdam's merchants began controlling every aspect of the industry. They owned the ships, the nets, the salt works, the processing facilities, and the distribution networks. This comprehensive approach to business would later be applied to far more lucrative trades. By the early 15th century, Amsterdam had grown from a fishing village into a legitimate trading centre with a population approaching 10,000. The city's merchants had accumulated enough capital to begin investing in larger ships, more ambitious trading ventures, and the infrastructure needed to support a growing commercial hub. The physical transformation of the city during this period was remarkable. The original wooden dam was replaced with a more substantial stone structure. New canals were dug to accommodate larger ships and to drain the surrounding marshland for construction. The first stone houses began to appear, replacing the simple wooden structures of earlier generations. But the most significant change was in the mindset of Amsterdam's inhabitants. They were no longer thinking like fishermen or farmers. They were thinking like merchants, constantly looking for new opportunities to buy low, sell high, and profit from the movement of goods between different markets. This merchant mentality was reinforced by Amsterdam's unique social structure. Unlike many medieval cities where rigid class hierarchies limited social mobility, Amsterdam offered opportunities for advancement to anyone with the intelligence and determination to seize them. Successful merchants could accumulate wealth and influence regardless of their birth circumstances. This social flexibility attracted ambitious individuals from across Europe. Young men seeking their fortunes made their way to Amsterdam, bringing with them knowledge, skills, and connections from their home regions. This constant influx of talent and ideas kept Amsterdam's commercial culture dynamic and innovative. The city also began developing the financial institutions that would later make it the centre of international finance. Early forms of banking emerged as merchants needed ways to transfer money safely across long distances. Insurance systems developed to protect against the risks of maritime trade. Credit networks allowed merchants to finance larger and more ambitious ventures. These financial innovations were crucial because they allowed Amsterdam's merchants to operate on a scale that their limited local capital alone could never have supported. By pooling resources and spreading risks, they could undertake trading ventures that would have bankrupted individual merchants. The late 15th century brought new challenges and opportunities. The discovery of sea routes to Asia and the Americas was revolutionizing global trade patterns. Traditional overland routes through the Mediterranean were becoming less important, while Atlantic and North Sea ports gained strategic significance. Amsterdam found itself perfectly positioned to take advantage of these changes. Its location on the North Sea gave it direct access to the new Atlantic trade routes, while its established networks in Northern Europe provided the capital and expertise needed to participate in long-distance commerce. The city's merchants began forming partnerships with Portuguese and Spanish traders who were returning from voyages to Asia and the New World laden with exotic goods. Amsterdam became a distribution centre for spices, sugar, precious metals, and other luxury items that were flowing into Europe from distant continents. This role as a distribution hub was incredibly profitable because it allowed Amsterdam's merchants to add value to goods without the risks and costs of long-distance voyaging. They could buy exotic goods in bulk from returning ships, store them in Amsterdam's warehouses, and then sell them in smaller quantities to merchants from across Northern Europe. The profits from this intermediary trade provided the capital that Amsterdam would need for its next phase of expansion. By the early 16th century, the city's merchants had accumulated enough wealth to begin financing their own long-distance trading expeditions, rather than simply waiting for foreign traders to arrive at their docks. This transition from passive middleman to active trader marked a crucial turning point in Amsterdam's development. The city was no longer dependent on others for its commercial opportunities. It was beginning to create its own destiny through bold entrepreneurship and strategic investment. The stage was now set for Amsterdam's transformation from regional trading centre to global commercial powerhouse. The foundations had been laid through centuries of gradual development, careful relationship building, and the accumulation of both capital and expertise. But the real story of Amsterdam's rise to become the richest city on earth was just beginning. The next phase would involve political revolution, religious upheaval, and economic innovations that would reshape not just Amsterdam, but the entire world economy. The merchants of Amsterdam were about to embark on the most audacious business venture in human history, one that would establish their city as the undisputed centre of global commerce and create fortunes that would dwarf the wealth of kings and emperors. The transformation that would elevate Amsterdam from ambitious trading port to global economic superpower began with a crisis that threatened to destroy everything the city had built. In the late 15th and early 16th centuries, the Low Countries found themselves caught in the crossfire of European power politics, religious warfare, and imperial ambition. The region had long been controlled by the Duchy of Burgundy, but through marriage and inheritance, it had fallen under the rule of the Spanish Habsburgs. Charles V, who became Holy Roman Emperor in 1519, viewed the prosperous Dutch provinces as little more than a source of taxation to fund his endless wars across Europe. For Amsterdam's merchants, this foreign rule initially seemed manageable. Trade continued to flow, profits continued to accumulate, and the city's population continued to grow. But beneath the surface, tensions were building that would soon explode into open rebellion. The first major shock came with the Protestant Reformation. Martin Luther's ideas spread rapidly through the Low Countries, finding particularly fertile ground among the merchant classes who resented both religious and political interference from distant rulers. Amsterdam's traders, already accustomed to thinking independently about business matters, proved equally willing to think independently about religious ones. The Catholic Spanish authorities responded with increasing repression. The Spanish Inquisition was introduced to root out Protestant heresy. New taxes were imposed to fund Spanish military campaigns. Most damaging of all, trade restrictions were implemented that threatened to strangle Amsterdam's commercial growth. These policies created a perfect storm of religious, political, and economic grievances. Amsterdam's merchants found themselves facing a choice: submit to Spanish rule and accept limits on their commercial ambitions, or rebel and risk everything they had built. The decision, when it came, was not made in the halls of power, but in the counting houses and warehouses where Amsterdam's wealth was created. The merchant elite understood that their prosperity depended on freedom of trade, freedom of religion, and freedom from arbitrary taxation. Spanish rule threatened all three. The Dutch Revolt, which began in 1566, would last for 80 years and reshape the map of Europe. But for Amsterdam, the rebellion represented something more than just a war of independence. It was an opportunity to break free from the constraints that had limited the city's growth and to pursue commercial ambitions on a truly global scale. The early years of the revolt were chaotic and destructive. Spanish armies swept through the Low Countries, laying siege to rebellious cities and imposing brutal reprisals on captured territories. Amsterdam itself remained under Spanish control for much of this period, its merchants watching nervously as their competitors in other Dutch cities suffered under military occupation. But this apparent disadvantage would prove to be Amsterdam's salvation. While other cities were being destroyed and their population scattered, Amsterdam was quietly positioning itself to benefit from the chaos. The city's merchants used their Spanish connections to gather intelligence about enemy movements, while secretly funding the rebellion through loans and supplies. More importantly, Amsterdam began attracting refugees from the war-torn regions to the south. Antwerp, which had been the Low Countries' premier commercial centre, was devastated by Spanish sieges and blockades. Thousands of skilled merchants, craftsmen, and financiers fled north, bringing with them capital, expertise, and international business connections. These refugees didn't just arrive empty-handed. Many brought substantial wealth that they had managed to smuggle out before the Spanish arrived. Others possessed specialized knowledge about international trade routes, banking practices, and manufacturing techniques that had made Antwerp prosperous. Amsterdam welcomed these newcomers with open arms, recognizing that their arrival represented an unprecedented opportunity to accelerate the city's commercial development. Rather than viewing the refugees as competitors, Amsterdam's existing merchant community saw them as partners who could help expand into new markets and industries. This influx of talent and capital coincided with a crucial military development. In 1578, Amsterdam finally joined the rebellion against Spanish rule, declaring its allegiance to William of Orange and the Dutch cause. This decision immediately transformed the city from a reluctant participant in the conflict into one of its most important centres. The timing could not have been better. By 1585, Spanish forces had recaptured Antwerp and imposed a naval blockade that effectively ended its role as a major trading centre. Amsterdam found itself perfectly positioned to inherit Antwerp's commercial networks, customer relationships, and position as the Low Countries' primary port. The transfer of commercial supremacy from Antwerp to Amsterdam was not automatic. It required careful planning, substantial investment, and the ability to convince international traders that Amsterdam could provide the same services that Antwerp had offered, but with greater security and lower costs. Amsterdam's merchants rose to this challenge with characteristic determination and innovation. They began by improving the city's infrastructure, dredging deeper channels to accommodate larger ships, and building new warehouses to store increasing volumes of goods. The famous canal ring that defines Amsterdam's historic centre was largely constructed during this period, creating both transportation arteries and prestigious addresses for successful merchants. But infrastructure alone was not enough. Amsterdam needed to demonstrate that it could offer something that Antwerp, even in its heyday, had never provided: complete freedom of trade and religion. The city declared itself open to merchants of all nationalities and faiths, creating a cosmopolitan commercial environment that was unique in the 16th century Europe. Jewish merchants fleeing persecution in Spain and Portugal found sanctuary in Amsterdam, bringing with them connections to trading networks that spanned the Mediterranean, the Ottoman Empire, and the emerging markets of the New World. Protestant refugees from across Catholic Europe contributed their own expertise and capital to Amsterdam's growing commercial empire. This religious tolerance was not merely a matter of humanitarian principle, though Amsterdam's merchants certainly took pride in their city's welcoming atmosphere. It was also a calculated business strategy. In an age when religious warfare was disrupting trade across Europe, Amsterdam's reputation as a safe haven for merchants of all faiths gave it a crucial competitive advantage. The results were spectacular. Between 1580 and 1620, Amsterdam's population more than doubled, growing from around 30,000 to over 100,000 inhabitants. More importantly, the volume of trade flowing through the city increased even more dramatically. Ships that had once sailed to Antwerp now made Amsterdam their primary destination. The city's merchants used this influx of business to refine and expand their operations. They developed new techniques for financing long-distance trade, created more sophisticated insurance systems, and established permanent trading posts in distant markets. Amsterdam was evolving from a regional trading centre into the hub of a global commercial network. The breakthrough that would establish Amsterdam's dominance came with the decision to challenge Portuguese control of the Asian spice trade. For over a century, Portugal had maintained a monopoly on European access to the valuable spices, silk, and other luxury goods produced in the East Indies. This monopoly generated enormous profits, but it also created opportunities for anyone bold enough to challenge it. Amsterdam's merchants had been observing Portuguese operations in Asia with growing interest. They recognized that Portugal's small population and limited resources made it vulnerable to determined competition. More importantly, they believed that Dutch efficiency and innovation could deliver Asian goods to European markets more cheaply than the Portuguese monopoly allowed. The first Dutch expeditions to Asia were launched in the 1590s, initially as small-scale ventures designed to test Portuguese defences and identify profitable trading opportunities. These early voyages were financed by syndicates of Amsterdam merchants who pooled their resources to spread the enormous risks involved in such distant ventures. The success of these initial expeditions exceeded all expectations. Dutch ships returned to Amsterdam laden with spices that sold for many times their purchase price in Asian markets. The profits were so extraordinary that they attracted investment from across Europe, with foreign merchants eager to participate in this lucrative new trade. But Amsterdam's merchants quickly realized that sporadic expeditions would never be sufficient to challenge Portuguese dominance effectively. What was needed was a permanent, well-funded organization capable of sustaining long-term competition in Asian markets. This realization led to one of the most important innovations in business history: the creation of the world's first modern multinational corporation. In 1602, the Dutch East India Company was founded through the merger of several competing Amsterdam trading companies. This new organization known as the VOC, was granted extraordinary powers by the Dutch government, including the right to wage war, negotiate treaties, and establish colonies in the name of the Dutch Republic. The VOC represented a revolutionary approach to organising long-distance trade. Rather than relying on individual merchants or temporary partnerships, it created a permanent institution with substantial capital, professional management, and the ability to coordinate operations across multiple continents. This scale and sophistication gave Dutch traders decisive advantages over their Portuguese competitors. Amsterdam served as the VOC's headquarters and primary source of financing. The city's merchants provided the initial capital for the company's operations and continued to invest in its expanding activities throughout Asia. In return, they received dividends that made many of them extraordinarily wealthy and established Amsterdam as the center of an emerging global economy. The profits flowing back to Amsterdam from Asian trade were unlike anything Europe had ever seen. Individual VOC shareholders earned returns of 20, 30, even 40% annually on their investments. These profits were then reinvested in other commercial ventures, creating a virtuous cycle of economic expansion that accelerated Amsterdam's growth and influence. But the VOC was just the beginning of Amsterdam's commercial revolution. The city's merchants were simultaneously developing new trading relationships in the Americas, establishing banking connections across Europe, and creating financial innovations that would form the foundation of modern capitalism. The Amsterdam Stock Exchange, established in 1602, became the world's first modern securities market. Here, shares in the VOC and other trading companies could be bought and sold, allowing investors to participate in global commerce without directly managing trading operations themselves. This innovation democratized international trade and created new sources of capital for Amsterdam's expanding commercial empire. The creation of the stock exchange marked a pivotal moment in Amsterdam's evolution from ambitious trading port to financial superpower. For the first time in human history, ordinary citizens could own pieces of global trading ventures without leaving their home city. Bakers, brewers, and blacksmiths found themselves investing alongside wealthy merchants, creating a broad base of stakeholders in Amsterdam's commercial success. This democratization of investment had profound consequences that extended far beyond simple profit sharing. It created a citywide culture of entrepreneurship, where every resident had a vested interest in Amsterdam's trading ventures. When VOC ships departed for Asia, entire neighborhoods would gather at the harbor to wish them well, knowing that their own fortunes were tied to the success of these distant voyages. The psychological impact of this shared ownership cannot be overstated. Amsterdam's citizens began thinking like global traders, following news from distant markets with the same intensity that people in other cities followed local gossip. Coffee houses became informal trading floors where merchants, investors, and ordinary citizens gathered to exchange information about commodity prices, shipping schedules, and political developments that might affect their investments. This constant flow of information created what we might recognize today as the world's first efficient market. Prices in Amsterdam reflected not just local supply and demand, but global conditions across the Dutch trading empire. A poor monsoon in Java would affect spice prices in Amsterdam within months. Political instability in the Baltic would immediately impact grain futures. Amsterdam had become the nerve center of a global economic network. The profits flowing into the city from these diverse ventures were staggering by any historical standard. Conservative estimates suggest that Amsterdam controlled roughly 40% of all global seaborne trade by the mid-17th century. To put this in perspective, no single city today commands anything approaching this level of dominance over world commerce. These extraordinary profits funded a transformation of Amsterdam that was visible to anyone walking its streets. The modest wooden houses of earlier centuries gave way to magnificent stone mansions decorated with exotic materials imported from across the globe. Wealthy merchants competed to build the most impressive canal-side residences, creating the architectural splendor that still defines Amsterdam's historic center today. But the real measure of Amsterdam's wealth was not found in individual mansions or public monuments. It was in the city's capacity to finance ventures that would have bankrupted entire kingdoms. When the VOC needed to build a fleet of ships larger than most national navies, Amsterdam's merchants provided the capital. When new trading posts needed to be established on the other side of the world, Amsterdam's banks supplied the financing. This financial power gave Amsterdam influence that extended far beyond commerce. European monarchs found themselves borrowing money from Amsterdam's banks to finance their wars and palace construction projects. The city that had once paid taxes to distant rulers now found itself in the position of lending money to those same rulers' successors. The transformation was perhaps most evident in Amsterdam's relationship with England, traditionally one of Europe's most powerful maritime nations. English merchants increasingly found themselves dependent on Amsterdam's financial markets to fund their own trading ventures. Many English companies discovered that they could raise capital more easily in Amsterdam than in London, leading to the paradoxical situation where England's commercial expansion was being financed by its primary competitor. This financial dominance was built on innovations that went far beyond simple money lending. Amsterdam's merchants pioneered sophisticated credit instruments that allowed them to finance trade across multiple continents simultaneously. They developed insurance systems that could protect investments from risks ranging from piracy to political upheaval. Most importantly, they created banking networks that could transfer funds across vast distances with unprecedented speed and security. The technological foundations of these innovations were often surprisingly simple, but their implementation required a level of trust and cooperation that had never before existed on such a scale. Amsterdam's merchants developed standardized contracts, uniform weights and measures, and reliable systems for verifying the quality of goods traded in distant markets. These seemingly mundane improvements reduced transaction costs and increased efficiency in ways that generated enormous competitive advantages. The city's dominance in maritime insurance exemplifies this combination of innovation and systematic implementation. Amsterdam's insurers didn't just accept risks that others avoided, they developed scientific methods for calculating those risks based on detailed records of shipping losses, weather patterns, and political stability in different regions. This data-driven approach allowed them to offer better terms than competitors while maintaining healthy profit margins. The insurance industry also illustrates how Amsterdam's commercial innovations created self-reinforcing cycles of growth. As the city's insurers became more sophisticated, they attracted business from across Europe, generating profits that could be invested in new trading ventures. These ventures, in turn, created demand for more insurance, expanding the industry and attracting additional talent and capital to Amsterdam. Similar dynamics operated across Amsterdam's entire commercial ecosystem. The city's banks attracted deposits from across Europe because they offered better security and higher returns than alternatives. These deposits provided capital for new trading ventures, which generated profits that attracted more deposits. Success bred success in an ascending spiral that seemed to have no natural limits. The human dimension of this commercial revolution was equally remarkable. Amsterdam, in the early 17th century, was home to what was arguably the most sophisticated business community in human history. Merchants who had started as small-scale traders found themselves managing commercial empires that spanned multiple continents, Former refugees became international financiers whose decisions affected commodity prices from London to Lisbon to Jakarta. This concentration of commercial talent created an environment of intense innovation and competition. Merchants constantly sought new ways to reduce costs, improve efficiency, and identify profitable opportunities that their competitors had overlooked. The result was a level of commercial sophistication that would not be matched again until the Industrial Revolution. The social implications of this wealth concentration were complex and sometimes contradictory. On one hand, Amsterdam became remarkably egalitarian by the standards of its time. Successful merchants, regardless of their origins, could achieve social status and political influence that would have been impossible in more traditional societies. The city's tolerance for religious and ethnic diversity created opportunities for talented individuals who would have faced discrimination elsewhere. On the other hand, the enormous profits generated by global trade created levels of inequality that were unprecedented in European history. The wealthiest Amsterdam merchants lived in luxury that rivaled royalty, while the city's growing population of workers and small shopkeepers struggled to afford basic necessities in an increasingly expensive city. This inequality was made more visible by Amsterdam's compact geography. Unlike modern cities where wealth and poverty are often segregated into different neighbourhoods, Amsterdam's canal-side mansions stood just blocks away from crowded tenements, housing the workers who loaded and unloaded the ships that generated the city's prosperity. The contrast created social tensions that Amsterdam's leaders worked carefully to manage. The city's merchants understood that their prosperity depended on maintaining social stability and preventing the kind of class warfare that had disrupted other European cities. They invested heavily in public works projects, charitable institutions, and cultural amenities that provided employment and improved living conditions for ordinary citizens. The famous Dutch Golden Age of painting, literature, and scholarship was directly funded by Amsterdam's commercial success. Wealthy merchants became patrons of the arts, commissioning works that celebrated both their individual achievements and their city's collective prosperity. The result was a cultural flowering that matched Amsterdam's economic dominance. Artists like Rembrandt and Vermeer found eager customers among Amsterdam's merchant elite, who wanted their portraits painted and their homes decorated with scenes that reflected their global reach and sophisticated tastes. Writers and philosophers found financial support for works that explored themes of tolerance, commerce, and individual achievements that resonated with Amsterdam's commercial culture. This cultural investment was not merely decorative, it served important practical functions in maintaining Amsterdam's competitive advantages. The city's reputation for cultural sophistication attracted talented individuals from across Europe, expanding the pool of human capital available for commercial ventures. International visitors were impressed by Amsterdam's combination of commercial success and cultural achievement, enhancing the city's reputation as a desirable place to do business. The scientific revolution that was transforming European thought also found generous support in Amsterdam. Merchants who had made fortunes through careful observation and systematic analysis of global markets understood the value of scientific research. They funded innovations in navigation, cartography, and engineering that directly supported their commercial operations, while contributing to humanity's broader understanding of the natural world. Amsterdam's printers and publishers became the most important in Europe, producing books and maps that spread knowledge about distant lands and new commercial opportunities. The city's libraries and learned societies attracted scholars from across the continent, creating an intellectual environment that reinforced Amsterdam's position as Europe's most dynamic and forward-thinking city. By the 1660s, Amsterdam had achieved a position of global dominance that seemed unshakable. The city controlled trade routes that connected Europe to Asia, Africa, and the Americas. Its financial markets determined commodity prices worldwide. Its innovations in banking, insurance, and corporate organization had been copied but never equaled by competitors in other cities. The VOC had established permanent trading posts from South Africa to Japan, creating what was essentially a private commercial empire that generated profits exceeding the tax revenues of most European kingdoms. Amsterdam's merchants had achieved the seemingly impossible dream of controlling global commerce from a small city built on reclaimed swampland. Yet even at the height of its power, Amsterdam faced challenges that would test its dominance in ways its merchants could barely imagine. Competing nations were learning from Amsterdam's innovations and developing their own global trading capabilities. Political conflicts were reshaping the balance of power in Europe in ways that would threaten the Dutch Republic's security and independence. Most ominously, the very success that had made Amsterdam wealthy was beginning to create complacency among some of its merchants. The first generation of global traders had been driven by hunger and ambition, willing to risk everything for the chance to build something unprecedented. Their successors, born into wealth and comfort, would prove less willing to embrace the risks and uncertainties that global commerce demanded. The stage was being set for challenges that would test whether Amsterdam's commercial empire could adapt and survive, or whether the city would follow the same trajectory as other great trading centres that had risen to dominance only to decline when circumstances changed. The next phase of Amsterdam's story would determine whether its golden age represented a brief moment of historical brilliance or the foundation for enduring global influence. The warning signs of Amsterdam's eventual decline were already visible to those who knew where to look, though few at the time recognized them for what they were. The very innovations that had made Amsterdam wealthy were being studied, copied, and improved upon by competitors who harbored their own ambitions for global dominance. England, in particular, watched Amsterdam's success with a mixture of admiration and envy. English merchants had initially been content to rely on Amsterdam's financial markets and trading networks, but by the 1650s, a new generation of English leaders was determined to challenge Dutch supremacy. They understood that control of global trade was not just about wealth, but about national power and security. The first serious challenge came through legislation rather than warfare. The English Navigation Acts, passed beginning in 1651, required that goods imported into England be carried either on English ships or ships from the country of origin. This seemingly technical regulation was actually a direct assault on Amsterdam's role as Europe's primary entrepot. Amsterdam's merchants had built their fortunes by serving as intermediaries, buying goods from producers and selling them to consumers across Europe. The Navigation Acts threatened to cut them out of the lucrative English market, forcing direct trade relationships that bypassed Amsterdam entirely. For a city whose prosperity depended on being the middleman in global commerce, this represented an existential threat. The Dutch response was swift and aggressive. If England wanted to restrict trade through legislation, Amsterdam's merchants were prepared to defend their interests through military force. The result was a series of conflicts known as the Anglo-Dutch Wars that would rage intermittently for over 2 decades. These wars represented something new in European history. Conflicts fought primarily over commercial rather than territorial objectives. Both sides understood that control of trade routes and markets was becoming more important than control of land. The battles were fought on the high seas, in distant colonies, and through economic warfare that targeted each other's merchant shipping. Amsterdam's merchants approached these conflicts with the same systematic analysis they applied to commercial ventures. They calculated the costs of warfare against the value of the markets they were defending. They invested in naval construction with the same careful attention to return on investment that guided their trading decisions. War for Amsterdam was simply business conducted through other means. The Dutch initially held significant advantages in these conflicts. Their navy was larger and more experienced than England's. Their financial resources allowed them to sustain military operations longer than their competitors. Most importantly, their global trading network provided strategic bases and intelligence capabilities that England could not match. But the wars also revealed weaknesses in Amsterdam's position that had been masked by earlier successes. The city's prosperity had made it dependent on global trade in ways that created vulnerabilities. When English privateers began targeting Dutch merchant shipping, the impact on Amsterdam's economy was immediate and severe. The very interconnectedness that had generated wealth now threatened to spread economic damage throughout the Dutch commercial empire. More troubling was the discovery that Amsterdam's competitors were learning faster than expected. English naval tactics improved dramatically during the course of the wars. English merchants developed their own global trading networks that reduced their dependence on Amsterdam's services. English financial institutions began offering alternatives to Amsterdam's banks and insurance companies. The human cost of these conflicts was enormous, but Amsterdam's merchants were perhaps more concerned about the financial implications. Military spending was diverting capital from profitable trading ventures. The constant threat of warfare was increasing insurance costs and reducing profit margins. Foreign investors were beginning to question whether Amsterdam could maintain its commercial dominance in an increasingly hostile international environment. The wars also accelerated political changes within the Dutch Republic that would have long-term consequences for Amsterdam's autonomy. Military necessity required coordination between the various Dutch provinces that had previously operated with considerable independence. The House of Orange, which provided military leadership during the conflicts, gained political influence at the expense of Amsterdam's merchant oligarchy. This shift towards centralized political authority conflicted with the decentralized commercial culture that had made Amsterdam successful. The city's merchants had prospered by making quick, independent decisions based on market conditions. They were uncomfortable with political systems that required consultation, compromise, and subordination to national rather than commercial interests. The tension between Amsterdam's commercial culture and the Dutch Republic's political needs became particularly acute during the Third Anglo-Dutch War, which began in 1672. This conflict coincided with a French invasion of the Dutch Republic that threatened the very existence of the state. Faced with enemies on multiple fronts, the Dutch were forced to make strategic choices that prioritized political survival over commercial advantage. Amsterdam's merchants found themselves in the unprecedented position of having to subordinate their global commercial interests to national defense requirements. Ships that should have been carrying goods to profitable markets were instead defending Dutch coasts. Capital that should have been invested in new trading ventures was instead being used to build fortifications and hire soldiers. The psychological impact of this shift was as significant as the economic consequences. For over a century, Amsterdam's merchants had operated with the confidence that their commercial success gave them control over their own destiny. The realization that their prosperity could be threatened by political forces beyond their control marked a fundamental change in the city's relationship with the wider world. Yet Amsterdam's response to these challenges also demonstrated the resilience and adaptability that had originally made the city successful. Rather than simply defending existing positions, Amsterdam's merchants began developing new strategies for maintaining their commercial dominance under changed circumstances. One crucial adaptation was the development of more sophisticated financial instruments that could function effectively even during periods of political instability. Amsterdam's banks pioneered new forms of international credit that reduced dependence on physical shipments of gold and silver. They created insurance products that could protect investments from political as well as commercial risks. These innovations attracted new customers from across Europe, who were seeking alternatives to traditional banking systems that were vulnerable to warfare and political upheaval. Amsterdam's reputation for financial stability became as important as its role in physical trade, creating new sources of profit that were less vulnerable to military interference. The city's merchants also began diversifying their operations geographically in ways that reduced dependence on any single market or trade route. They established permanent commercial operations in multiple countries, creating redundant networks that could continue functioning even if some components were disrupted by warfare or political change. This geographic diversification was facilitated by Amsterdam's continuing advantages in human capital. The city remained Europe's most cosmopolitan commercial centre, attracting talented individuals who brought knowledge of distant markets and local conditions. These international connections allowed Amsterdam's merchants to adapt their operations to changing political circumstances more quickly than competitors who lacked such diverse networks. The development of new colonial territories also provided opportunities for Amsterdam's merchants to maintain their global reach despite increasing competition in established markets. While the English and French were challenging Dutch positions in Asia and the Americas, vast regions of Africa and the Pacific remained relatively unexplored commercially. Amsterdam's merchants approached these new frontiers with the same systematic methodology that had made them successful elsewhere. They invested in exploration and mapping expeditions that identified profitable trading opportunities. They established permanent bases that could support long-term commercial operations. They developed relationships with local populations that facilitated trade while minimizing political complications. But perhaps the most important adaptation was Amsterdam's evolution from a center of physical trade to a center of financial and informational services. As other cities developed their own manufacturing capabilities and trading networks, Amsterdam's merchants recognized that their competitive advantages increasingly lay in their superior knowledge of global markets and their sophisticated financial capabilities. The Amsterdam Stock Exchange expanded beyond simple share trading to become a market for government bonds, commodity futures, and complex financial derivatives. These innovations allowed investors to profit from global economic trends without directly participating in physical trade. More importantly, they generated fees and commissions that provided steady income regardless of fluctuations in specific markets. The city's coffee houses evolved into informal intelligence networks where merchants, diplomats, and travelers exchanged information about political developments, market conditions, and commercial opportunities across Europe and beyond. This information was itself a valuable commodity that Amsterdam's merchants could use to make better investment decisions and advise clients from other cities. Amsterdam's printers and publishers capitalized on this demand for information by producing newspapers, market reports, and commercial guides that were distributed across Europe. These publications not only generated profits directly, but also reinforced Amsterdam's reputation as Europe's best-informed commercial centre. The cumulative effect of these adaptations was to transform Amsterdam from a city that depended primarily on controlling physical trade routes to one that profited from providing sophisticated services to a global commercial network. This evolution allowed Amsterdam to maintain its prosperity even as other cities began challenging its dominance in specific markets. However, these adaptations also required changes in Amsterdam's social and cultural character that created new tensions within the city. The shift toward financial services favoured merchants with education and international connections over those whose success had been built on practical trading experience. The increasing importance of information and analysis created new forms of inequality between those who had access to knowledge and those who did not. The physical character of Amsterdam also changed during this period in ways that reflected these evolving economic realities. New buildings were constructed to house banks, insurance companies, and trading exchanges rather than warehouses and manufacturing facilities. The city's architecture became more sophisticated and cosmopolitan, reflecting its role as an international financial centre rather than a regional trading port. These changes were visible in the daily life of Amsterdam's residents. The streets that had once been filled with carts carrying goods to and from ships were now crowded with clerks, accountants, and financial analysts hurrying between offices. Coffee houses that had previously catered to ship captains and cargo handlers now served bankers and insurance brokers discussing complex financial transactions. The cultural implications of this transformation were equally significant. Amsterdam's merchants had originally prided themselves on their practical knowledge of goods, markets, and trading conditions. The new economy increasingly rewarded theoretical understanding of financial principles, political trends, and abstract market relationships. This shift created generational tensions within Amsterdam's merchant families. Older merchants who had built their fortunes through hands-on trading experience sometimes found themselves unable to understand the complex financial instruments that their sons and grandsons used to generate profits. The entrepreneurial culture that had originally made Amsterdam successful was evolving in ways that emphasized sophistication over innovation, analysis over action. Yet Amsterdam's ability to adapt and evolve also demonstrated the enduring strengths that had originally made the city successful. The same flexibility that had allowed Amsterdam's merchants to pivot from herring fishing to global trade now enabled them to transition from physical commerce to financial services. The tolerance for diversity and innovation that had attracted refugees and entrepreneurs from across Europe continued to draw talented individuals who contributed new ideas and capabilities. As the 17th century drew to a close, Amsterdam remained one of Europe's wealthiest and most influential cities, though its dominance was no longer unchallenged. The city had successfully adapted to changing political and economic circumstances in ways that preserved its prosperity while transforming its character. The question that would determine Amsterdam's future was whether these adaptations represented a sustainable foundation for continued success or merely a temporary postponement of inevitable decline. The merchants who had once seemed capable of controlling global commerce through sheer determination and innovation now found themselves operating in an increasingly complex world where political, military, and economic forces interacted in ways that no single city could fully control. Amsterdam's golden age was evolving into something different, though whether that transformation represented progress or decline would only become clear with the passage of time. The dawn of the 18th century found Amsterdam at a crossroads that would define its place in the emerging modern world. The city that had once commanded global commerce, with absolute authority, now faced the sobering reality that its golden age was giving way to a more complex and competitive international landscape. The War of Spanish Succession, which erupted in 1701, exemplified the new challenges confronting Amsterdam's commercial empire. This massive European conflict pitted major powers against each other in a struggle for continental dominance that would last over a decade. For Amsterdam's merchants, the war represented both opportunity and existential threat in ways that previous conflicts had not. Unlike earlier wars that had been fought primarily over trade routes and commercial privileges, this new conflict threatened to reshape the entire European balance of power. The potential union of French and Spanish crowns under Bourbon rule would create a Catholic superpower that could dominate both Atlantic and Mediterranean trade. For Protestant Amsterdam, which had built its prosperity on challenging Catholic monopolies, this prospect was terrifying. Amsterdam's response revealed how profoundly the city's strategic thinking had evolved since the heroic days of the Dutch Revolt. Rather than relying primarily on their own military and commercial capabilities, Amsterdam's merchants now found themselves coordinating with English and Austrian allies in a complex diplomatic and military alliance. The city that had once stood alone against Spanish power now operated as part of a multinational coalition. This shift toward alliance building reflected Amsterdam's growing recognition that the scale of global commerce had expanded beyond what any single city could control. The profits that had once seemed limitless were now constrained by the need to share markets, coordinate policies, and compromise with partners whose interests did not always align with Amsterdam's commercial objectives. The human cost of this new reality became evident in Amsterdam's changing social structure. The merchant families who had dominated the city during its golden age found themselves competing not just with local rivals, but with international networks of financiers, politicians, and military leaders whose power derived from sources other than commercial success. Young men from Amsterdam's most prominent families increasingly sought careers in diplomacy, military service, and government administration rather than following their fathers into trade. This brain drain deprived Amsterdam's commercial sector of the talent and energy that had originally made it successful, while creating a new class of cosmopolitan elites whose loyalties extended beyond the city's immediate interests. The physical transformation of Amsterdam during this period reflected these changing social realities. The practical warehouses and trading facilities that had characterized the city during its commercial heyday gave way to elegant townhouses and cultural institutions that demonstrated wealth and sophistication rather than productive capacity. Amsterdam was evolving from a working commercial port into something resembling a modern financial and cultural centre. This evolution was most visible in the city's approach to colonial administration. The VOC, which had originally been managed like an extended trading company, increasingly resembled a government agency responsible for administering vast territorial holdings across Asia. The focus shifted from maximizing short-term trading profits to managing long-term political relationships with local rulers, competing European powers, and increasingly assertive local populations. The administrative burden of governing these territories required new forms of expertise that Amsterdam's traditional merchant community was not equipped to provide. The city began recruiting administrators, lawyers, and military officers who possessed the skills needed for colonial governance but lacked the entrepreneurial instincts that had originally made Amsterdam successful. This professionalization of colonial administration initially improved the efficiency and stability of Dutch overseas operations. Systematic record-keeping replaced the informal networks that had characterized earlier trading ventures. Standardized procedures reduced corruption and improved accountability. Professional military forces provided better security for Dutch commercial operations, but these improvements came at the cost of the flexibility and adaptability that had originally given Amsterdam's merchants their competitive advantages. Bureaucratic procedures that ensured consistency also slowed decision-making in rapidly changing market conditions. Professional administrators who understood legal and political complexities often lacked the commercial instincts needed to identify and exploit profitable opportunities. The tension between a systematic administration and entrepreneurial flexibility became particularly evident in Amsterdam's approach to new markets and trading opportunities. Where earlier generations of merchants had been quick to experiment with untested ventures, their successors increasingly relied on detailed analyses and formal approval processes that reduced risks but also limited potential rewards. This cautious approach served Amsterdam well in established markets where the primary challenges involved optimizing existing operations rather than pioneering new ones. The city's financial institutions became more sophisticated and reliable, attracting customers who valued stability and predictability over spectacular returns. Amsterdam's insurance companies developed actuarial methods that reduced uncertainty while maintaining profitability. But caution also meant that Amsterdam's merchants were slower to recognize and respond to emerging opportunities than their more aggressive competitors. English and French traders, operating with less capital but greater willingness to accept risks, began establishing themselves in markets that Amsterdam's merchants had dismissed as too speculative or politically unstable. The Atlantic slave trade exemplified this dynamic. Amsterdam's merchants had participated in this horrific commerce since its earliest stages, but they approached it with the same systematic methodology they applied to other forms of trade. They developed efficient transportation systems, standardized procedures for purchasing and selling human beings, and financial instruments that spread the risks involved in these brutal operations. Yet this systematic approach, while profitable, also made Amsterdam's slave traders vulnerable to more aggressive competitors who were willing to accept higher risks in exchange for greater potential profits. English and French traders began offering better terms to African suppliers and American purchasers, gradually eroding Amsterdam's market share in this lucrative but morally abhorrent trade. The loss of dominance in the slave trade was symptomatic of broader changes in Amsterdam's competitive position. The city's merchants remained wealthy and influential, but they were no longer setting the terms for global commerce in the way they had during the previous century. They had become participants in markets that were increasingly controlled by others rather than creators of new markets that others sought to enter. This shift was reflected in Amsterdam's relationship with its colonial territories. The VOC continued to generate substantial profits from its Asian operations, but these profits increasingly came from administering existing territories rather than expanding into new ones. The company had evolved from an aggressive commercial organization into a conservative colonial administration, more concerned with protecting established positions than pursuing new opportunities. The Dutch West India Company, which had been established to compete with Spanish and Portuguese interests in the Americas, faced even greater challenges. Unlike the VOC, which had succeeded in establishing dominant positions in several Asian markets, the WIC never achieved the same level of success in the more competitive Atlantic environment. English and French competitors possessed larger populations, more extensive manufacturing capabilities, and greater willingness to invest in military forces needed to establish and defend colonial territories. The WIC found itself constantly struggling to maintain positions that its competitors could challenge with superior resources and more aggressive tactics. The company's difficulties were compounded by Amsterdam's evolving strategic priorities. The city's merchants increasingly viewed American operations as secondary to their more profitable Asian interests. This lack of commitment became self-reinforcing, as reduced investment led to reduced returns, which justified further reductions in investment. By the 1720s, the WIC had largely abandoned its original ambitions for challenging Spanish and Portuguese dominance in the Americas. Instead, it focused on managing a few profitable but limited operations in the Caribbean and South America, while leaving the broader American market to English and French competitors. This strategic retreat from the Americas had profound implications for Amsterdam's long-term position in global commerce. The Atlantic economy was growing more rapidly than the Asian trade that remained Amsterdam's primary focus. By concentrating on established Asian markets while ceding ground in the dynamic American territories, Amsterdam's merchants were inadvertently positioning themselves in the slower-growing sectors of the global economy. The consequences of these strategic choices became evident in Amsterdam's changing relationship with other European commercial centres. London, which had originally depended on Amsterdam's financial services and commercial expertise, increasingly developed its own capabilities in these areas. English merchants who had once relied on Amsterdam's networks began establishing direct relationships with suppliers and customers around the world. Paris, despite France's political instability and frequent military conflicts, emerged as a serious competitor in luxury goods and cultural products that generated high profit margins. French merchants proved particularly successful in developing markets for fashion, art and intellectual products that appealed to Europe's growing wealthy classes. Even smaller cities like Hamburg and Bordeaux began challenging Amsterdam's dominance in specific markets by offering more specialized services or accepting lower profit margins in exchange for greater market share. The fragmentation of European commerce that had originally benefited Amsterdam by creating opportunities for intermediation now worked against the city as competitors developed their own capabilities. Amsterdam's merchants responded to these challenges with characteristic ingenuity, but their solutions increasingly emphasized preserving existing advantages rather than creating new ones. They developed more sophisticated financial instruments that generated steady returns from established investments rather than funding bold new ventures. They refined their commercial procedures to maximize efficiency in known markets rather than exploring unknown territories. This conservative approach was not without its successes. Amsterdam remained Europe's most important financial center, with banks and insurance companies that attracted customers from across the continent. The city stock exchange continued to facilitate international investment on a scale that no other institution could match. Amsterdam's commercial infrastructure remained the most sophisticated in the world. But these achievements, impressive as they were, represented refinements of past innovations rather than breakthroughs that would secure Amsterdam's future dominance. The city was becoming extraordinarily good at managing the global commercial system that it had created, but it was no longer leading the development of new systems that would define the next phase of economic evolution. The cultural implications of this transformation were as significant as the economic ones. Amsterdam's golden age had been characterized by a dynamic interaction between commercial success and cultural innovation. Wealthy merchants had patronized artists, writers, and scholars who celebrated the city's achievements while exploring new ideas about society, politics, and human nature. The Amsterdam of the early 18th century remained wealthy and cultured, but its cultural life increasingly emphasized preservation and refinement rather than innovation and experimentation. The city's artists produced technically superior works that demonstrated their mastery of established techniques, rather than pioneering new forms of expression. Its scholars focused on systematizing and preserving knowledge rather than challenging conventional wisdom. This cultural conservatism reflected and reinforced the economic conservatism that was beginning to characterize Amsterdam's approach to commerce. The risk-taking mentality that had originally made the city successful was being replaced by a preference for certainty and stability that, while comfortable, also limited future growth potential. The generational dynamics within Amsterdam's merchant families exemplified these broader changes. The founders of the city's great commercial dynasties had been willing to risk everything for the chance to build something unprecedented. Their descendants, born into wealth and comfort, were more interested in preserving their inheritances than gambling them on uncertain ventures. This shift was visible in the career choices made by young men from Amsterdam's most prominent families. Where their grandfathers had left school early to learn practical trading skills, they now pursued extended educations in law, philosophy, and classical literature that prepared them for careers in administration and diplomacy rather than commerce. These educational changes reflected Amsterdam's evolving position in European society. The city was no longer an upstart challenger seeking to disrupt established orders. It had become part of the establishment, with interests in maintaining stability rather than promoting change. Amsterdam's merchants now had more in common with traditional European elites than with the entrepreneurial outsiders they had once been. The implications of this social transformation extended far beyond Amsterdam itself. The city that had once served as Europe's primary engine of commercial innovation was becoming a force for preserving existing arrangements rather than creating new ones. This change would have profound consequences for the future development of global commerce and the emergence of new centres of economic power. As Amsterdam entered the middle decades of the 18th century, its position remained formidable but no longer unassailable. The city controlled enormous wealth, possessed unmatched commercial expertise, and maintained global networks that generated steady profits. Yet the dynamic energy that had originally created these advantages was dissipating in ways that would determine whether Amsterdam's golden age represented a permanent achievement or a temporary historical moment. The answer to that question would depend on whether Amsterdam's merchants could rediscover the innovative spirit that had originally made them successful, or whether they would continue down the path of comfortable conservatism that preserved short-term stability at the cost of long-term dynamism. The stakes could not have been higher, for Amsterdam's choice would influence not just the city's own future, but the broader evolution of global economic power in the centuries to come. The forces that would ultimately challenge Amsterdam's supremacy were gathering strength in ways that few contemporary observers fully understood. While Amsterdam's merchants continued to profit from their established networks and refine their financial instruments, fundamental changes in global commerce were creating opportunities for more aggressive competitors to challenge the Dutch commercial empire. The most significant of these changes was the dramatic expansion of manufacturing capabilities across Europe. England, in particular, was beginning to develop industrial production methods that would revolutionize the relationship between raw materials and finished goods. Where Amsterdam had built its fortune by trading commodities produced elsewhere, English manufacturers were creating value through production processes that transformed inexpensive raw materials into valuable finished products. This shift toward manufacturing represented a fundamental challenge to Amsterdam's business model. The city's merchants had prospered by controlling the flow of goods between producers and consumers, taking profits from their role as sophisticated middlemen. But if English manufacturers could produce goods more cheaply than traditional suppliers, they could bypass Amsterdam's networks entirely and sell directly to consumers. The implications became clear in the textile industry, which had been one of Amsterdam's most profitable sectors. English manufacturers began producing woolen cloth that competed directly with products that Amsterdam's merchants had traditionally imported from other regions. The English goods were not necessarily superior in quality, but they could be produced at lower costs and with greater reliability than imports that depended on complex international supply chains. Amsterdam's textile merchants initially dismissed this English competition as a temporary phenomenon. They believed that their superior knowledge of international markets and their established customer relationships would protect them from manufacturers who lacked global commercial experience. This confidence proved to be misplaced, as English producers demonstrated remarkable adaptability in reaching new markets and responding to customer preferences. The success of English manufacturing was not simply a matter of lower costs or improved technology. It reflected a fundamental shift in how commercial enterprises were organized and managed. English manufacturers integrated production and distribution in ways that eliminated many of the intermediary steps that had traditionally generated profits for Amsterdam's merchants. This integration was facilitated by England's domestic market, which was both larger and more unified than the fragmented European markets that Amsterdam served. English manufacturers could achieve economies of scale by producing large quantities for their home market, while using export sales to generate additional profits. Amsterdam's merchants, by contrast, had to navigate multiple small markets with different currencies, regulations, and customer preferences. The political dimensions of this commercial competition became increasingly important as European governments recognized the strategic implications of manufacturing capabilities. Nations that could produce their own goods were less dependent on foreign suppliers and less vulnerable to economic disruption during periods of political conflict. England's government began implementing policies designed to support domestic manufacturing while reducing dependence on Dutch commercial networks. Import duties were adjusted to favour English products over foreign alternatives. Export incentives encouraged English manufacturers to compete in markets that had previously been dominated by Amsterdam's merchants. Navigation laws were enforced more rigorously to ensure that English trade was carried on English ships rather than Dutch vessels. These protectionist policies were not unique to England. France, Prussia, and other European powers implemented similar measures designed to reduce their dependence on Amsterdam's commercial services while building their own manufacturing and trading capabilities. The open, interconnected European economy that had enabled Amsterdam's rise was being replaced by a more fragmented system of competing national economies. Amsterdam's merchants found themselves caught in an increasingly difficult position. Their prosperity depended on maintaining access to multiple European markets, but each of those markets was implementing policies designed to reduce dependence on foreign intermediaries. The cosmopolitan, tolerant commercial culture that had originally attracted customers from across Europe was becoming a liability in an age of rising nationalism and economic protectionism. The city's response to these challenges revealed both the strengths and limitations of its commercial culture. Amsterdam's merchants demonstrated remarkable flexibility in adapting their operations to changing market conditions. They developed new financial products that helped European governments fund their economic development programs. They provided insurance and credit services that supported the expansion of manufacturing in other countries. But these adaptations also meant that Amsterdam was increasingly financing and facilitating its own competition. The capital that flowed from Amsterdam's banks helped fund the construction of manufacturing facilities that would compete with Amsterdam's traditional trading networks. The insurance policies written by Amsterdam's companies protected the ships and factories that were challenging Dutch commercial supremacy. This paradox reflected Amsterdam's evolution from a predatory commercial power that had aggressively challenged established monopolies to a mature financial centre that profited from facilitating economic activity regardless of its competitive implications. The entrepreneurial aggression that had originally made Amsterdam successful was being replaced by a more passive approach that emphasized providing services rather than controlling markets. The transformation was perhaps most evident in Amsterdam's relationship with its colonial territories. The VOC continued to generate substantial profits from its Asian operations, but these profits increasingly came from managing established territories rather than expanding into new markets or developing new products. The company had evolved into something resembling a colonial administration that happened to engage in commerce rather than a commercial organization that happened to control territories. This shift in priorities reflected the changing mentality of Amsterdam's merchant class, which was becoming more interested in steady returns from established investments than in the risks and uncertainties of aggressive expansion. The Dutch colonial administrators who managed these territories were competent and often innovative in their approach to governance, but they lacked the commercial instincts that had originally made the VOC successful. They focused on maintaining political stability, collecting taxes, and preventing other European powers from challenging Dutch positions, rather than identifying new opportunities for profitable trade. This administrative approach was not without its successes. The Dutch colonies in Asia were generally well governed by the standards of their time. They provided steady revenues that supported Amsterdam's continued prosperity. They maintained Dutch prestige and influence in regions where other European powers were constantly struggling to establish themselves. But these achievements came at the cost of the dynamic expansion that had characterized the VOC's early operations. The company was no longer pioneering new trade routes or establishing relationships with previously unknown markets. It had become a conservative organization more concerned with protecting existing positions than creating new ones. The consequences of this conservative approach became evident when new competitive pressures emerged in Asian markets. English and French trading companies, operating with government support and greater willingness to accept risks, began challenging Dutch positions in markets that Amsterdam had controlled for over a century. The English East India Company, in particular, proved to be a formidable competitor. Unlike the VOC, which had evolved into a colonial administration, the English company maintained its focus on commercial objectives. English traders were more willing to adapt their operations to local conditions, more flexible in their negotiations with Asian rulers, and more aggressive in pursuing new opportunities. The competition between Dutch and English interests in Asia was not simply a matter of commercial rivalry. It reflected different approaches to colonial relationships that would have profound implications for the future development of global trade. The Dutch approach emphasized systematic administration and gradual economic development. The English approach prioritized rapid expansion and maximum extraction of short-term profits. Neither approach was inherently superior, but the English strategy proved more effective in an increasingly competitive international environment. English traders could respond more quickly to changing market conditions because they were not constrained by the administrative procedures that had made Dutch operations more systematic, but also more rigid. The human dimension of this competition was particularly significant. The VOC had difficulty recruiting talented young men for Asian service because colonial administration offered fewer opportunities for rapid advancement and wealth accumulation than it had during the company's earlier, more entrepreneurial phase. The best and brightest members of Amsterdam's merchant families increasingly sought opportunities in European finance and politics rather than Asian trade. The English East India Company, by contrast, attracted ambitious young men who saw Asian service as a pathway to rapid wealth and social advancement. These recruits brought energy and innovation to English operations that contrasted sharply with the bureaucratic caution that increasingly characterized Dutch activities. The cultural implications of this shift extended beyond the immediate commercial competition. Amsterdam had originally built its success on attracting talented individuals from across Europe who were seeking opportunities to advance themselves through commercial enterprise. The city's reputation as a place where merit and determination could overcome birth and background had been crucial to its ability to attract the human capital needed for global commerce. But as Amsterdam's commercial culture became more conservative and systematic, it became less attractive to the kind of risk-taking entrepreneurs who had originally made the city successful. Young men seeking rapid advancement increasingly looked to London, Paris, or even smaller cities that offered greater opportunities for innovation and experimentation. This brain drain was gradual and often invisible to contemporary observers, but its cumulative impact was substantial. Amsterdam remained home to some of Europe's most successful merchants and financiers, but the city was no longer the obvious destination for ambitious young Europeans seeking their fortunes in global commerce. The demographic changes within Amsterdam itself reflected these broader trends. The city's population continued to grow, but the character of that growth had changed significantly. Where earlier expansion had been driven by the arrival of skilled merchants, craftsmen, and professionals seeking commercial opportunities, Later growth increasingly consisted of workers and service providers supporting the needs of established wealthy families. This shift toward a more stratified social structure was visible in Amsterdam's changing physical appearance. The practical commercial buildings that had characterized the city during its entrepreneurial phase gave way to elegant residential areas designed to demonstrate wealth and status rather than facilitate business activities. Amsterdam was becoming more beautiful and more comfortable, but also more static and less dynamic. The city's cultural life reflected these social changes. Amsterdam's theatres, museums, and learned societies became more sophisticated and more cosmopolitan, but they also became more focused on preserving and celebrating past achievements, rather than encouraging new forms of creative expression. The cultural flowering that had accompanied Amsterdam's commercial rise was evolving into something more refined but less innovative. These cultural changes both reflected and reinforced the economic conservatism that was beginning to characterize Amsterdam's approach to commerce. A society that valued preservation over innovation was naturally inclined toward business strategies that emphasized protecting existing advantages rather than pursuing new opportunities. The educational institutions that trained Amsterdam's future commercial leaders exemplified this conservative trend. Where earlier generations of merchants had learned their skills through practical experience in trading operations, their successors increasingly received formal educations that emphasized theoretical knowledge over hands-on experience. This shift toward formal education was not inherently problematic, but it created a disconnect between Amsterdam's commercial leadership and the practical realities of global trade. Young men who had studied classical literature and moral philosophy were often less prepared to make the quick, pragmatic decisions that successful commerce required than their predecessors who had learned business skills through apprenticeship and direct experience. The generational tensions within Amsterdam's merchant families became increasingly pronounced, as older merchants who had built their fortunes through practical trading experience found themselves succeeded by sons and grandsons who approached business with more theoretical and systematic methods. These younger merchants were often more sophisticated in their understanding of financial principles and international politics, but they sometimes lacked the intuitive understanding of markets and human psychology that had made their predecessors successful. They could analyze complex investment opportunities with mathematical precision, but they were less skilled at identifying entirely new opportunities that had not yet been systematized. The cumulative effect of these changes was to transform Amsterdam from a city that created new forms of commercial organization and practice into one that refined and perfected existing approaches. This transformation was not necessarily negative in the short term, as refinement and systematization often improved efficiency and reduced costs. But in the longer term, Amsterdam's increasing focus on perfecting existing practices rather than pioneering new ones left the city vulnerable to competitors who were more willing to experiment with innovative approaches to commerce and finance. The very sophistication that made Amsterdam's merchants so successful in established markets also made them less adaptable when market conditions changed in fundamental ways. The irony of Amsterdam's position by the mid-18th century was that the city had become a victim of its own success. The wealth and stability that merchants had created through entrepreneurial innovation now encouraged conservative approaches that prioritized preserving that wealth over risking it in pursuit of even greater achievements. This conservative mentality was not universal among Amsterdam's commercial community, but it was increasingly dominant among the families and institutions that controlled the city's major trading and financial operations. The result was a gradual but significant shift in Amsterdam's role within the global economy, from pioneer to maintainer, from innovator to administrator. As Amsterdam approached the final decades of the 18th century, its position remained formidable by any historical standard. The city controlled enormous wealth, possessed unmatched commercial expertise, and maintained global networks that generated steady profits. But the dynamic energy that had originally created these advantages was being channeled into preserving existing achievements rather than creating new ones. The question facing Amsterdam's merchants was whether they could recognize and respond to the changing competitive environment before their conservative approach to business left them permanently disadvantaged relative to more aggressive competitors. The answer to that question would determine not just Amsterdam's future prosperity, but its place in the emerging modern world economy that was beginning to take shape around new centres of manufacturing and innovation. The stakes of this choice extended far beyond Amsterdam itself. The city that had pioneered many of the commercial and financial practices that defined modern capitalism now faced the challenge of adapting those practices to a world that had changed dramatically since Amsterdam's golden age. Success would require recovering the innovative spirit that had originally made Amsterdam successful, while applying it to circumstances that no previous generation of merchants had ever faced. The challenge that would ultimately determine Amsterdam's fate was not just economic but psychological. The merchants who had once risked everything on untested ventures now found themselves managing inherited wealth in an increasingly complex world where the rules of commerce were being rewritten by forces beyond their control. The American Revolution, which erupted in 1775, exemplified these new realities in ways that Amsterdam's merchants could not have anticipated. The conflict between Britain and its North American colonies created both opportunities and dangers that tested every assumption about how global commerce operated. Initially, many Amsterdam merchants viewed the American Rebellion as a potential windfall. If the colonists succeeded in breaking away from British rule, they would need new trading partners and sources of financing for their economic development. Amsterdam's banks and trading houses possessed exactly the kind of international expertise that a newly independent nation would require. The Dutch Republic's decision to support the American rebels seemed to offer Amsterdam's merchants an opportunity to regain some of the commercial influence they had lost to British competitors. By providing loans and supplies to the Continental Congress, Amsterdam could potentially establish privileged trading relationships with what might become a major new market. But the Fourth Anglo-Dutch War, which resulted from this support for American independence, demonstrated how dramatically the balance of international power had shifted since Amsterdam's golden age. The British naval blockade of Dutch ports was far more effective than anything Amsterdam's merchants had previously experienced. Ships that had once moved freely between European ports found themselves trapped in harbour or captured by British privateers. The economic impact was immediate and devastating. Trade that had generated steady profits for decades simply stopped. Warehouses filled with goods that could not be shipped to their intended markets. Amsterdam's famous financial markets, which had functioned smoothly through previous conflicts, began experiencing the kind of volatility and uncertainty that had once characterized less sophisticated trading centers. More troubling than the immediate losses was the realization that Amsterdam's merchants had become dependent on international systems that they no longer controlled. The city's prosperity required access to global markets, but that access could be denied by political decisions made in London, Paris, or Madrid. The independence that had once been Amsterdam's greatest strength had become a vulnerability in an age of great power competition. The peace settlement that ended the war in 1784 provided little comfort for Amsterdam's commercial community. While the Dutch Republic retained its formal independence, the terms of the agreement clearly established Britain as the dominant maritime power. Amsterdam's merchants would henceforth operate in a world where British naval supremacy could be used to enforce British commercial interests. The psychological impact of this subordination was as significant as its economic consequences. Amsterdam's merchants had built their identity around the belief that commercial success could provide independence from political interference. The discovery that even the wealthiest trading city in the world could be brought to its knees by foreign naval power forced a fundamental reassessment of Amsterdam's place in the global order. The response revealed the extent to which Amsterdam's commercial culture had changed since the heroic days of the Dutch Revolt. Rather than seeking to rebuild their independent capabilities, many of Amsterdam's most prominent merchants began exploring partnerships with foreign powers that could provide the political protection their commercial operations required. These partnerships represented a fundamental shift in how Amsterdam's merchants understood their relationship with political authority. Where their predecessors had used commercial success to achieve political independence, the new generation was willing to accept political dependence in exchange for continued commercial opportunities. The French Revolution, which began in 1789, accelerated these trends in ways that few Amsterdam merchants initially understood. The revolutionary upheaval across the French border seemed to offer new opportunities for profitable investment and trade. Amsterdam's banks provided loans to various French factions, while its merchants sought to profit from the chaos by supplying goods that French producers could no longer provide. But the radical ideology emerging from a revolutionary France posed fundamental challenges to the aristocratic commercial culture that had developed in Amsterdam. The French revolutionaries' attacks on inherited privilege and traditional authority threatened the very foundations upon which Amsterdam's merchant dynasties had built their power and influence. The invasion of the Dutch Republic by French revolutionary armies in 1795 marked the end of Amsterdam's independence in ways that previous conflicts had not. Unlike earlier occupations, which had been primarily military affairs, the French occupation involved systematic attempts to restructure Dutch society according to revolutionary principles. The traditional merchant oligarchy that had governed Amsterdam for 2 centuries found itself replaced by revolutionary administrators who viewed commercial privilege with deep suspicion. The guilds and trading companies that had organised Amsterdam's economic life were dissolved or reorganised according to egalitarian principles that prioritised political correctness over commercial efficiency. These changes were traumatic for Amsterdam's established merchant families, but they also created opportunities for new forms of commercial organisation that proved surprisingly effective. Younger merchants who had been excluded from the traditional oligarchy found themselves able to participate in trading ventures that had previously been controlled by established families. The result was a brief renaissance of entrepreneurial energy in Amsterdam as a new generation of merchants applied innovative approaches to commercial opportunities created by the revolutionary wars. These new entrepreneurs often lacked the extensive international networks that had made their predecessors successful, but they compensated with greater flexibility and willingness to experiment with untested business models. The most successful of these revolutionary-era entrepreneurs focused on supplying the massive military forces that were reshaping the European continent. The armies that marched across Europe required enormous quantities of food, clothing, equipment, and ammunition that traditional suppliers could not provide. Amsterdam's merchants proved remarkably adept at organising the complex logistics needed to support these military operations. This military supply business was both profitable and dangerous. Contracts were large and payment was often guaranteed by governments with extensive tax collection capabilities. But political loyalties shifted rapidly during the revolutionary period, and merchants who had supplied one faction might find themselves branded as traitors when power changed hands. The risks were exemplified by the career of merchants who had prospered by supplying French revolutionary armies, only to face persecution when Napoleon consolidated his control over the revolutionary government. The Emperor's continental system, which attempted to exclude British goods from European markets, created new opportunities for smuggling and black market trading, but it also imposed severe penalties on merchants who were caught violating trade restrictions. Amsterdam's response to these challenges demonstrated both the resilience and the limitations of its commercial culture. The city's merchants proved remarkably skilled at adapting to rapidly changing political circumstances. They developed new networks for moving goods across militarized frontiers. They created financial instruments that could function effectively despite currency instability and political uncertainty. But these adaptations were fundamentally reactive rather than innovative. Amsterdam's merchants were responding to circumstances created by others rather than shaping those circumstances according to their own commercial objectives. The city that had once set the terms for global trade was now struggling to maintain its position within a system controlled by foreign political and military leaders. The Napoleonic period marked a fundamental transformation in Amsterdam's relationship with the global economy. The city remained an important commercial centre, but it was no longer the autonomous force that had once reshaped international trade according to its own interests. Amsterdam had become a sophisticated service provider within a global system whose parameters were determined by political rather than commercial considerations. This transformation was visible in the changing character of Amsterdam's business community. The merchant princes who had once commanded global trading empires gave way to professional managers who specialized in particular aspects of international commerce. Banking, insurance, and shipping became separate industries rather than integrated components of comprehensive trading operations. This specialization improved efficiency in many areas and allowed Amsterdam to maintain its competitive position in specific markets. The city's banks became increasingly sophisticated in their approach to international finance. Its insurance companies developed actuarial methods that were more accurate and comprehensive than anything previously available. Its shipping companies pioneered new technologies that reduced transportation costs and improved reliability. But specialization also meant that no single institution or individual in Amsterdam possessed the comprehensive understanding of global markets that had made the city's earlier merchants so formidable. The holistic approach that had allowed Amsterdam's golden age entrepreneurs to identify and exploit entirely new forms of commercial opportunity was being replaced by technical expertise in narrowly defined areas. The cultural implications of this transformation extended far beyond the immediate commercial sphere. Amsterdam's intellectual life, which had once been energized by the practical challenges of global trade, became increasingly academic and theoretical. The city's scholars and writers produced sophisticated analyses of economic and political developments, but they were no longer directly engaged in creating those developments. This shift toward intellectual sophistication was not entirely negative. Amsterdam became home to some of Europe's most advanced thinking about economics, politics, and social organization. The city's universities and learned societies attracted students and scholars from across the continent who came to study the latest developments in these fields. But the increasing separation between intellectual analysis and practical commercial activity meant that Amsterdam's thinkers were often more concerned with understanding and systematizing existing knowledge than with generating new insights that could lead to practical innovations. The dynamic interaction between theory and practice that had characterized Amsterdam's golden age was being replaced by more conventional academic approaches. The generational changes within Amsterdam's merchant families reflected these broader cultural trends. The sons and grandsons of successful traders increasingly pursued careers in law, diplomacy, and public administration, rather than following their fathers into commerce. These career choices reflected both the reduced opportunities available in traditional trading activities and the increased prestige associated with professional and governmental positions. This exodus of talent from commercial activities was gradual and often disguised by the continued prosperity of established merchant families. Many of Amsterdam's wealthiest residents remained nominally involved in trading operations while actually deriving most of their income from inherited investments rather than active commercial management. The result was a merchant community that was increasingly dominated by inherited wealth rather than entrepreneurial achievement. Young men entered Amsterdam's commercial elite through family connections rather than demonstrated ability, leading to a gradual decline in the quality of commercial decision-making and strategic thinking. This decline was not immediately apparent because Amsterdam's established commercial operations continued to generate substantial profits. The city's banks and trading houses possessed so much accumulated capital and so many established relationships that they could maintain their positions even with less innovative management. But the long-term implications were severe. Amsterdam was gradually losing its capacity to identify and respond to fundamental changes in global economic conditions. The merchant community that had once pioneered entirely new forms of commercial organization was becoming increasingly focused on managing existing operations rather than creating new ones. The Industrial Revolution that was beginning to transform production methods across Europe exemplified Amsterdam's changing relationship with economic innovation. The city's merchants were quick to recognize the commercial potential of new manufacturing technologies, and Amsterdam's financial institutions provided crucial funding for industrial development projects across the continent. But Amsterdam itself did not become a major center of industrial production. The city's merchants preferred to finance manufacturing operations in other locations rather than investing in local industrial development. This choice reflected both practical considerations about available land and labor costs and cultural preferences for the kind of sophisticated commercial and financial activities that had traditionally generated Amsterdam's wealth. The decision to remain primarily a commercial and financial center rather than embracing industrial development was understandable, given Amsterdam's existing advantages and expertise. But it also meant that the city was choosing to specialize in economic activities that were becoming less central to overall economic growth, as manufacturing capabilities became more important sources of wealth creation. The consequences of this strategic choice would become apparent over the following decades as industrial centres like Manchester, Birmingham, and the Ruhr Valley emerged as new sources of economic dynamism. Amsterdam remained wealthy and influential, but it was no longer at the cutting edge of economic development in the way it had been during its golden age. The transformation of Amsterdam from economic pioneer to sophisticated service provider was not a failure by conventional standards. The city maintained its prosperity, preserved its cultural achievements, and continued to play an important role in European commerce and finance. Many of Amsterdam's residents enjoyed higher standards of living than their ancestors could have imagined. But the city had lost something intangible that had once made it unique: the sense that anything was possible for people with sufficient determination and intelligence. Amsterdam's golden age had been characterized by a belief that existing limitations could be overcome through innovation and entrepreneurship. The more mature Amsterdam of the late 18th century was characterized by a preference for working within established systems rather than challenging them. This psychological shift had practical consequences that extended far beyond Amsterdam itself. The city, that had once served as Europe's primary engine of commercial innovation, was becoming a force for stability and continuity rather than change and experimentation. Amsterdam's influence was now exercised through preserving and refining existing economic arrangements rather than creating new ones. As the 18th century drew to a close, Amsterdam faced a choice that would determine its role in the emerging modern world. The city could continue down the path of comfortable conservatism that preserved its wealth and status while gradually reducing its influence over global economic development. Or it could somehow rediscover the innovative spirit that had originally made it successful and apply that spirit to the new challenges and opportunities of the industrial age. The answer to this choice would determine whether Amsterdam's golden age represented a permanent contribution to human economic development or simply a remarkable but temporary historical achievement. The merchants who had once seemed capable of reshaping the world through sheer determination and intelligence now faced the more subtle but equally important challenge of adapting their city's role to a world that no longer needed the particular forms of leadership that Amsterdam had once provided. The legacy of Amsterdam's golden age would endure regardless of the city's future choices, but whether that legacy would continue to grow and evolve or simply be preserved as a historical monument remained an open question. The answer would depend on whether Amsterdam could find new ways to apply its accumulated wisdom and expertise to the challenges of a rapidly changing world, or whether the very success that had made the city great would ultimately limit its capacity for continued growth and adaptation. The story of Amsterdam's rise to become the richest city on earth was drawing to a close, but the implications of that achievement would continue to influence economic development for centuries to come. The innovations in finance, trade organization, and global commerce that Amsterdam had pioneered would spread throughout the world, creating the foundation for modern capitalism, even as the city that had created them adapted to a more modest but still significant role in the global economy. The final decades of the 18th century witnessed Amsterdam's transformation into something its golden age founders would have found both familiar and alien. The canals still bustled with commercial activity, the banks still processed international transactions worth more than most national treasuries, and the merchant houses still bore the names of families whose wealth stretched back generations. Yet beneath this veneer of continuity, the fundamental character of Amsterdam's relationship with global commerce had undergone a profound metamorphosis. The city that had once commanded the world's oceans through sheer audacity and innovation now found itself managing decline with the same methodical precision that had once fueled its ascent. This was not the dramatic collapse that had befallen previous commercial empires, but rather a gradual eclipse that left Amsterdam wealthy, influential, and increasingly irrelevant to the forces shaping the future of global trade. The merchants who gathered in Amsterdam's coffee houses during the 1790s possessed more accumulated knowledge about international commerce than any previous generation in human history. They could recite the seasonal price fluctuations of pepper in Jakarta, predict the impact of harvest failures on grain markets across the Baltic, and calculate currency exchange rates with mathematical precision that would have astounded their predecessors. But this encyclopedic knowledge was increasingly historical rather than predictive. The commercial world that Amsterdam's merchants understood so thoroughly was being superseded by new forms of economic organization that operated according to different principles and priorities. The patient, systematic approach to trade that had made Amsterdam successful was proving inadequate for an age that rewarded rapid adaptation and aggressive innovation. The irony was that Amsterdam's very sophistication had become a liability. The city's merchants had developed such refined techniques for managing established forms of commerce that they struggled to recognize when those forms were becoming obsolete. They continued perfecting their methods for organizing traditional trade routes, even as those routes were being bypassed by competitors who had discovered more efficient alternatives. The human dimension of this transformation was perhaps its most poignant aspect. Individual merchants who had inherited positions in Amsterdam's commercial hierarchy often possessed all the skills and knowledge needed for success, yet found themselves constrained by institutional structures that had been designed for a different era. Young men with entrepreneurial instincts discovered that the most profitable opportunities lay outside the traditional networks that their families had spent generations building. This generational tension manifested itself in countless small decisions that collectively reshaped Amsterdam's commercial culture. Ambitious young merchants increasingly sought partnerships with foreign firms rather than working within established Amsterdam houses. Investment capital flowed toward ventures in other cities that offered greater potential for growth. The brightest minds were attracted to new forms of economic activity that Amsterdam's traditional institutions were ill-equipped to support. The cumulative effect was to hollow out Amsterdam's commercial leadership from within. The city retained its wealth and its reputation, but the dynamic energy that had originally created both was dissipating in ways that few contemporary observers fully understood. Amsterdam was experiencing the peculiar tragedy of institutional success that had outlived its founding purpose. The Napoleonic Wars, which convulsed Europe for over 2 decades, provided a final test of Amsterdam's adaptability. The conflicts created enormous opportunities for merchants who could supply military forces, organize complex logistics, and navigate the chaotic political landscape of revolutionary Europe. These were exactly the kinds of challenges that had once brought out the best in Amsterdam's commercial community. And so, we reach the end of Amsterdam's extraordinary journey from muddy fishing village to the richest city on earth. What we've witnessed is nothing short of miraculous. A small group of determined merchants who refused to accept the limitations of their circumstances and instead chose to reshape the entire world according to their vision. Amsterdam's golden age teaches us that geography is not destiny, that inherited privilege cannot compete with relentless innovation, and that the courage to challenge established powers can yield rewards beyond imagination. The city that gave birth to modern capitalism, pioneered international finance, and created the first truly global economy did so not through accident or luck, but through the systematic application of human ingenuity to seemingly impossible challenges. Today, as we walk along those same canals where ships once arrived laden with spices from Java and silver from the Americas, we're reminded that the greatest empires are not built by armies or kings, but by ordinary people willing to risk everything for extraordinary dreams. Amsterdam's legacy lives on in every stock exchange, every multinational corporation, and every entrepreneur who dares to believe that the impossible is simply the untested.